life living and making a living can sometimes wear us out, grind us down, and dull our senses. So for a keen mind and a sharp contributive edge that can make it all easier and better and more productive, let's take some time to sharpen our axe. Stay with us right now for Life Talk.
Hello, I'm Gina Fitt, and you've either surfed to or purposely selected Life Talk with Vern Moses. Welcome to another in our series of ongoing verbal essays brought to you in this television format. It's truly a pleasure to have you with us today. Vern, we've had some wonderful guests on the show, and it's always a pleasure to have some of our favorite entertainers and bright minds and people who are making a contribution back, and maybe you could take a minute and introduce our guest today.
Well, I have several times before, and with good fortune each time. In other words, we've had a lot of favorable comments about who was that guy, and they were talking about Stephen Mills. And Stephen, it's nice to have you back on the show this evening. Stephen comes from the corporate environment, distinguished himself internationally with one of the more volatile corporations in the country when it comes to communications, that's MCI, and distinguished himself in the environment and across the country. So it's a joy to have you back here. Earlier today, we were pondering and commiserating over what I was going to talk about tonight, because quite typically we come here to the studio and we sit down, and Gina says, well, what are you going to talk about tonight, Vern? I said, well, I don't know. I probably will touch on this. And then she wants to kind of structure it, and we said, well, that's not, because we don't know what we're doing. We're practicing. Remember the term, practicing? No, but earlier today, we were talking about employees, corporate employees typically, who are subject to change because of new instructions and new techniques, and then they go into what we call survival, and they go home and agitate about it with their families. And in one sense of the word, I guess their families feel oppressed, and quite frankly, the companies become ogres, and that's not the intention. Where at the same time, in the same breath, they know that the company is the provision of their livelihood. So there's a lot of confusion sometimes about that. And so I thought we could wrap that around for a while this evening, and you kind of convey what you had in your mind, what you've seen, what we've experienced, maybe some solutions, or at least some suggestions. And so how do you want to start?
Well, I've noticed in the business world that most companies have something of a company gathering, maybe a picnic, a holiday gathering, or some kind of social event, and most of the companies now are restricting it to just the employees.
Really?
And not inviting the families. Now, there are some changes, and I know MCI had made some changes along that line too, inviting family members and the children as well to company picnics and a gathering or here and there. And the difference that it has made is that the family themselves come to meet some of the people that they have heard through the upset and disappointments and surprises at home are not very pleasant people, and yet they're encountering them in a very pleasant experience. So there's a lot of disappointment or confusion about what it is that the spouse is saying, what is that the company is portraying and doing with their spouse. So I think it'd be an interesting one to decide what can be done from the employee's perspective and the company to make this a better environment.
I was conscious of that years ago when I first, well, actually it was 1980. I've been doing the series that I do for about 8 years, and had always done it one-on-one, marketing to the individual, enrolling them, this type of thing. And I was in Pennsylvania, and there was a chief pilot of a Reading Aviation. It was a, what do they call it, one of those supportive airlines that, channel people into the major. And he came to the seminar at the behest of my daughter, who wanted him to hear this stuff, and he came reluctantly, but enjoyed. And he said, do you do this stuff for corporations? And I said, oh, well, yeah. Never had, but yeah, you do? I said, well, sure. And so he said, well, I think our company could benefit from this. Could you come to our board meeting next Tuesday? We'd be happy to pick you up and fly you in. I thought that sounded exciting. So here they were with a private plane Tuesday, and flew me in to their board meeting in Reading from Lancaster County. And I went in, and I didn't take any time at all. I submitted my proposal, a little naive, and I wanted $1,200 for one essay. It was about an hour and a half. And boy, they agreed quickly. And you know how you feel. I should have charged $1,700, but no. And everybody was excited about doing it, and I said, but I don't want to do it. And they, you know, you could just feel the lull in the room, and they, well, why not? I said, hear me out, I don't want to do it unless you invite the spouses and the teens to come and, you know, share in the experience. And they actually said, well, why would we do that? You know, I says, because that's your support system. See, what do you think these employees say when they go home, based on the little difficulties and challenges they face every day? You people turn out to be demons and ogres and actually the opposition, when in truth you're providing the living for the family. And I says, and if they come and they share in this, two things will happen. The spouses, men or women, doesn't matter, and the teenagers, and will have a different perspective. But more important, you'll be rubbing shoulders with the pilots and the, you know, the flight attendants and the baggage handlers and everything. And so they'll begin to see themselves as human beings. And so, well, yeah, okay, we'll do that. And so they did. They rented a room, and they had a nice buffet, and I did strategizing, which, you know, was kind of a fun essay. And after that, they had a little trio, and they played, and people danced, and the chatter, the communication, the intercourse that was going on was very satisfying to the owners. What's really fascinating is that even today, when my daughter goes through the Rating Aviation Terminal, people will still say, how's your dad? You know, I was still trying to be a walnut. You know, they still have a memory of that evening. And that's fascinating. And it did kind of break down a lot of barriers. Now, I don't know how many times they continued that sense, but it's apparent that who is at the workplace is a byproduct of who's coming from the home, and vice versa. And so, yeah, I think to include them as much as possible. I know when I had Club America years ago, at every annual convention, I had a special event just for the spouses. You know, the salespeople weren't, you know, allowed to attend, but we just sat down and say, you know, what's this business really all about? How can you best support them? What do you say? What do you not say in order to get the best result? And I have found, too, that right in front of an applicant, I'll bring in a spouse, again, man or woman, and I'll say, you probably know this person better than anybody in the world, better than they know themselves. And what can you tell me? What can you tell me that we can do to assist them to be ideal model employees or successful in this business? And they'll tell you the darndest stuff. They're really candid. And I'll say right in front of the applicant, now, I'm going to align myself with your spouse. And from time to time, I'm going to call and say, how's it going at home? Are they happy in their work? And in turn, you can call me, because, you know, at work, you know, this positive attitude stuff, they don't say anything. But then they go home and they, you know, they crash. And I want to know that so I can be of some assistance. Will you do that? And I swear some of the best managerial support I've ever had is from spouses. You know what I mean? Calling and say, Bern, something's wrong. They're not fulfilled about this. So maybe there's some work that needs to be done. Or what can I do? And it really has helped a lot. I can't imagine a corporation not involving the family, because that's who that person is. It doesn't separate. Oh, I know. Boy, I've heard it so many times. Well, business is business and family is family. We don't want to mix them. You've heard that, and that's not good counsel at all. Not good counsel. But I think you've seen some things happening over there at MCI and other places. What can you add to that?
Well, in the changes that go through an employee's life and their career, and in a volatile company such as communications or some of the other types of delivery and travel and transport that goes on, everything is changing so swiftly. The positions that people hold may vanish overnight, and yet their salary might remain the same, and yet their titles don't. So essentially the person is supported financially the same as they have been, and yet gone is the sophisticated title they might have held, and it might be a very different description.
Which is more important to some people.
And it may well be.
Yeah.
So those kinds of changes. In addition, we see teammates in our groups and culture of various companies. The teammates may or may not be supportive at all. They may feel like they're imposing or interfering in somebody's life and career if they bring up something to a supervisor or manager or senior manager that could otherwise help them, benefit them dramatically. And yet people are saying, well, I don't want to be, I don't want to say anything about this because that'll get them in trouble. When in fact, the supportive management team is looking for information to make a difference.
Right. Not to beat up people, but to support them.
Yeah.
I know recently I've taken on a different kind of staff. People were perceiving that it was a job. And I hate to say this, but I'll tell you, there was a day, I think it was a week or so ago, that I was more unhappy with my life and environment because of the dynamics of a seemingly employed group than I have been in a half a century with creative direct salespeople on commission. Mm-hmm. I mean, I became a dangerous, my little viper was really ready to strike because their little vipers were striking. Mm-hmm. What happens whenever there's a change, you can change scripting, or you can change desks, or you can change procedures, and change creates something that's irrational. Mm-hmm. And I think if we begin to understand what that is, it begins to quiet and soften, because I know as I communicated about it, I mean, the last few days have been so harmonious, because now they're aware on how to manage that a little bit differently. If I may take a moment to, you can't say this enough. I mean, you could say it every day, because there's a piece of our mind that keeps rejecting it. And that is that, my profiles aren't always what they should be, but in that brain you have this subconscious mind, okay, or subliminal mind, it's called. And we always have to remember that it's a survival mechanism, or I call a status quo pro. Now, I'd make that term up. It sounds like quid quo pro, but it's status quo pro, which means this entity, this subconscious mind, is very good, professional if you would, at keeping everything just the way it is. Well, the slightest change, and you know, it's really odd, sometimes even if it's our change, if we decide to do something different, something begins to happen in the mind, because we have to identify change and how it's perceived by this entity that can't see, hear, feel, smell, or taste. Okay, this entity that is so dominant in our life, if we leave it to its own devices, and it shouldn't be, but yet it is, but change is perceived as, see if we can agree on this definition, change is ceasing to be the way we are in order to be some other way, or things ceasing to be the way they are in order to be some other way. The key phrase is ceasing to be. And from a survival mechanism, can you imagine what that means? Ceasing to be? No. Yeah. As irrational as that is, this is what happens. And so this subconscious mind uses this entity to be inappropriate, to fight, to flee, to freeze, usually fight. And how do we fight? Verbally. I can't believe they're making changes again. They don't even know what they're doing. Well, if I was running this company, I'd tell you what was going on. You know, I mean, you can do a lot of damage with that. The venom that was pouring out in that small group of people out of their fear was just, I mean, truly upsetting. I mean, why can't they have more understanding? Well, you have to be patient and say, well, they don't understand this perhaps. They don't understand why they're doing that, because they just do it. They've always done it. Always will do it. That's the way I am. You ever hear that one? Well, it doesn't have to be that way. But to understand that any change, someone else's, and boy, as employees, we're subjected to that all the time, or even ourselves, when we set out to do something different, we're going to run into resistance. The status quo post says, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. If we do that, we're going to die. Okay? And from this perspective, it's absolutely right, and it manifests itself in sweaty palms and, you know, snickers and sneers and, you know what I mean, all this thing in order to avoid the change. But if we begin to understand that and can quiet that demon, if you would, quiet that subconscious and say, look, this is going to be okay, we're not going to die right now. You've heard that expression before. Then begin to get cognitive about this and to see how we can adjust and adapt. I tell you where the major shift came from in the last few days was communicating to these people that they're not employees. They don't have a job. They have their own business. You know, and I'm their customer. And I buy their time and their attention and their effort. You know what I mean? And as a customer, they should want it to be good and satisfying and make any adjustments that's necessary in order to satisfy the customer who's buying their product. And that they're the president and the vice president, the secretary and the treasurer of their own corporation. Okay, they're in command. And when I gave that to them and showed them what their authorities were in their own established business, that whole environment began to settle down a little bit. It's a whole different relationship. I had a man tell me today, I have never heard of anything like this before. He's 50 years old. He's 50 years old. And I mean, he's never accomplished much, never felt he had the opportunity. Well, chances are he was negotiating away a chunk of his time in exchange for a paycheck in order to help someone else reach their goal. I don't want to be surrounded by people who are just trying to help me reach my goal while I pay them for their time and energy. That is not a healthy state. I want them to be involved in our intention, involved in our mission, involved in what we're about, and then I pay them for their time and attention, which is their productivity. And boy, I'll tell you, that can make a difference. But I really think that, so I'm embattled somewhat by, in fact, I have people refute this, but I think there's two systems going on, you know, together. One of them is the free enterprise system, free enterprise, and then your capitalistic system. Like today, I was explaining it to a fellow, and he'd never heard of this, capitalistic system. Most of us, if we've been employees, have been beneficiaries and victims of the capitalistic system, both. Beneficiaries in that we've negotiated in exchange for a paycheck. And someone is there big enough to cut us a check no matter what happens, okay? We have to remember, though, that our job is to help them reach their goal, which is what? Making a profit for the investors. See, this didn't exist until the Industrial Revolution. And then capitalism seeped in where, you know, capital combined its assets and what have you, and built factories and what have you, and then they needed employees. And so they developed the educational system to prepare people to go to work for them. We have to understand that's really what happened. And so now we have people who are conditioned to be within this system, being used by it and enlightened by it. It's not all bad. I don't want to get into it. Yeah, I don't want to get into a plot, you know.
Right.
But not prepared to be free in the free enterprise system. A lot of people, you turn them loose over here, and 90% of them will fail. 90%. And all it is a psychic shift. It's understanding what that relationship is to what you're doing. And once we've done that, there's a major contribution been made.
Is there a value, Bern, in having a life's purpose that's similar to the company's mission? If you're involved in a capitalistic endeavor?
Well, there's no question that see, here's the thing, when you go to work for a company, I do think perhaps you surrender some dimensions of a purpose for yourself because you've taken on the responsibility of your company. And that's okay, you know. But then a statement of purpose that's in concert with your company and your family and your personal well-being has to be developed. And without that, things can get really uncomfortable. Now, a statement of purpose is, no one has one hardly. I mean, I know you do. I've asked thousands of people, do you have a purpose? Have you established, discerned, defined a purpose for your life? And
they look at you very blankly, like, what?
And then I threaten them by this, and I believe this with all my heart, that if you don't have a purpose for your life, you don't live in a vacuum, therefore you will have a posture about life, and it will be based on fear. In other words, the way I describe it in the seminar series, if I can flip this, I'll go all the way over. It's kind of like I perceive a purpose like an isosceles triangle, and a purpose has three dimensions to it. If it's properly written, it would be based on love, on nurturance or whatever, and the willingness to prepare, preparation. In other words, the will to win doesn't mean a thing. Doesn't mean a thing without the willingness to prepare to win. Okay, so the purpose statement it's better be based on love, which is the elevation, the edification, the enlightenment, the enhancement of something or someone. It doesn't have to be people, but it has to be the edification. The willingness to prepare to make a contribution to that. That's a purpose. A purpose is not something that you'll ever reach, you'll never accomplish it, it's just something that you're on, it's who you are, what you're about. If you don't have this written down, if it's not clear, then what I'm contending is that you will have a posture about life, and it looks like this. Now over here it's based on fear, which means anxiety, caution, tentativeness, accommodation, making do, coping, survival. And what happens over here, because you're waiting and you're subjective, there's a lot of neglect. Every day we encounter 90% of the people that we initiate contact with in the community are in neglect. They're incurious. Everything's okay just the way it is, don't bother me. That's dangerous. It's frightening when you see it. Neglect. And when you neglect enough, you find yourself kind of, you know, in trouble, overwhelmed, and so you strive for survival. Strive for survival. See the difference here. See, if you're in contribution, if you're not in contribution, you're in survival. See, if you're not preparing, you're neglecting. If you're not in love, you're in fear. And the only way to be over here is to discern it, to think about it. Now, all of this rests on what we have called the time lifeline, which is the time that exists between this moment and now. You know, the time and energy, our life in other words, between this moment now and that questionable place in the future when we cease to exist. We perceive succeeding as elevating, moving up. Which would be easier to move up, if you would, this plane when your leading edge is an apex like this or the dull edge? Leading. Not much question.
Sure.
This is terribly important, and it doesn't make any difference. A student should have a statement of purpose, an employee, an entrepreneur, a businessman. Now, that's not a mission statement. Mission is more specific. This is what I'm up to here. But a purpose. And this makes everything else worthwhile. Makes everything else seem to work better. And this is worth working on, no question.
How do people determine what their purpose is? It seems like there would be as many purposes as there are people.
It would seem so, yeah.
But
I think a lot of it is just thinking about what kind of thumbprint do I want to leave on the world, what kind of impact do I want to have on posterity, what mark do I want to make. If you're not sure of it, ask people, who do you think I am? What do you think I'm about? I know I worked for a long time on mine. I don't have it here with me this evening, but essentially it's to wonder. The purpose is just to wonder. The purpose of my life is to wonder. I believe that to wonder will turn the heads of more angels, if you would, than a plea. You know, if you just wonder about something, it's just things seem to come to you. You begin to collate information in a different way. But to wonder, to examine, to explore, okay, experiences in life in order to find out how I might make a contribution to the people around me. Okay? If I can do that, then I know I can be in a love mode. And it really, really, it's right on. It hasn't changed a word. I mean, I've watched it and tinkered with it and, you know, worked on it, and it's kind of expanded, but it always contracts to that one basic idea. And so it doesn't matter if I'm sleeping on a park bench or I'm living in a multi-million-dollar home, I'm still on purpose. Doesn't matter what my financial state is, doesn't matter what you think of me or what you say about me, I can be on purpose. And boy, life is so much simpler. It's just unbelievable. It's just simpler when you have one of these.
So this, a purposeful person, full with a basis in love, and this almost appearing to be the same kind of person, the same outward attributes, and yet hollow, a posture, if you will. They're really a shell of a person, not based on that love that fills
and never knowing
their sense
it.
Of purpose.
Never realizing it. You know, it's just that these people can sense them, you know, and be aware and can make a contribution, or they have to pass them by. I know this is biblical. I mean, this is not a religious show, but I mean, I believe the Master, Jesus, at one time said that if people don't listen, you know, if they won't respond to your appeal, just kick the dust off your sandals and move on. You know what I mean? You're not going to have any effect. And so the idea is to... Now, there is one thing. It's hard to discern a purpose. Boy, you can work on it. And I know it's difficult, but that's why it's so fruitful. Socrates said that if you can't find your purpose, if you can't find a purpose, adopt someone's. Now, find someone's purpose and then follow them very carefully, and out of that you will realize yours. And that seems to be logical. For example, I would assume that your purpose has developed to the point now where it's different than mine, but it might have been very similar when you started.
It was identical. in
Yeah,
the beginning.
identical, right.
Exactly.
Right, I can see that. But after a while, you go to your tangents, and you develop your own scheme for your own future, and that changes that purpose a little bit. I think the important thing is on purpose that you cannot reach it. It's not a goal. You have to, I mean, this should be a very abstract statement. It's just what you're about. Now, after that, you can create a commission. I call it commission rather than a mission statement, because in my command commission that we've written, it's much more specific. You know what I mean? From it, you can begin to attach a plan. You've defined your plan. Well, for example, I guess we got a moment to talk about this. As soon as you define a purpose for your life, it establishes automatically parameters for your life. In other words, these are principles in which that you live within, and you just know somehow that if you go over here and experiment, like you ignore your principles and go over here, that all of a sudden those parameters are going to take that in. You know, it's going to spread out, and then you violate it again, and the parameters are going to spread out again, and what happens? You know, in other words, here you were in the beginning, this was your purpose, and there's your parameters, and that has to stay the same, but if this keeps moving out on you, what's going to happen?
Fall flat.
Yeah, it's going to crumble.
Yeah.
And there's just a sense of that. And out of the purpose, however, those principles are all of a sudden yours. Not something that you're accommodating and living within and resisting. See, they're yours. And then once those parameters are established and firmly in place, then you define a plan in different facets of your life. Okay, and then those plans come down this way, and you notice how they're in concert. In other words, they overlap. It's kind of like when I'm here, I'm as fulfilled and in concert with family as when I'm with family. I mean, it's just like I'm never separate.
Yeah.
Everything that I do is kind of harmonious with my life's purpose. And boy, that's a nice feeling. I know people that, you know, I mean, their life looks like this. You know what I mean? It's like all over the place.
Sure.
Or they start out on something, you know what I mean? They'll go this way, and that doesn't work, so they go this way. You know, and then they go back and then this way. Or if they realize if they have a purpose, if they go this way and make a mistake, they go all the way back. But next time it's easy to get back to where you were. Everything gets simpler. And goals are more meaningful. See, this has nothing to do with goals. There's another dimension. We have to leave. We've run out of time. Gosh, good. Our phone number is 366-8749. If you call, we'll send you a ticket. Stephen, thank you. Gina, oh gosh, I'm sorry. Our time is gone. We'll be right back, though, next week.
Thank you.
Thank you, Baron.